because
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our third edition of the Third Digital Dialogues, brought to you by Broadband India Forum, Bharat Exhibitions, and CCAOI. The subject today is Internet Governance, and our event partner is TSDSI, and our knowledge partner is ICRIA. I will now hand you over to Dr. Rajat Kathuria, Director and Chief Executive Officer at ICRIA, who will be moderating the session for you. Over to you, sir. You are on mute, Rajat Kathuria. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajat. It's a privilege for ICRIA to be jointly doing this program with BIF, and we are very happy to be knowledge partners in this event. May I invite TV Ramachandran for his welcome address and theme introduction. Mr. TV Ramachandran, as you all know, has been the president of Broadband India Forum and is an industry veteran. He has been part of the mobile telephony sector in India since its very inception, as the first CEO of Sterling Cellular Delhi, and having established and led what we all know as the COAI, the Cellular Operators Association of India, for 12 years. He is also the honorary fellow of IET London and global advisory member of the IET Future Tech panel. He has also served as resident director, regulatory affairs and government relations, Vodafone India, for over 5 years. So, Mr. Ramachandran, over to you.
Thank you, Rajat. Respected Chief Guest, Mr. Vijay Sani, Secretary Meiti, respected Special Guests of Honor, Dr. Yovan Kubalia, Director, Diplo Foundation and Head of Geneva Internet Platform, Dr. Chengetai Mansango, Head of the UN Internet Governance Forum Secretariat, Ms. Shanti Das, Public Policy Director of Facebook, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, of course, Director and Chief Executive of ICRIA, who has kindly agreed to moderate our session, and other eminent panelists and partners here, and all you distinguished attendees. I'm indeed very happy and honored to welcome you all to this, the first digital dialogue of a set of 3 dialogues on internet governance, covering its significance for India, the role we must play, and the future of not just the network, but also the people who are yet to connect. And that we have many in India, the people yet to connect. Over the course of today's dialogue, we will hear our esteemed speakers set the context for the discussions that will follow on 3rd and 6th of July. Context is key to the overall discussion on internet governance, especially since some of the legacy issues unfortunately persist even to this day. The stability and security of the DNS, open and accessible networks, unity and diversity are all as relevant today as they were when discussions on internet governance first began in the early 2000s. It is significant that in the middle of a global pandemic and nationwide lockdown, we have gathered to discuss the management of the very thing that has allowed the economy to continue functioning. I'll repeat, it is significant that in the middle of a global pandemic and nationwide lockdowns everywhere, we have gathered to discuss the management of the very thing, the very instrument that has allowed the economy to continue functioning. At one point in time, limited to a few network computers in universities, the modern public internet is an evolved form and is today critical for enabling global communications, trade, content distribution, and a sole sovereign government. It has evolved into a global networked ecosystem, crucial for survival and growth in a globalized economy. It is therefore important to know and understand that the network is today, for all intents and purposes, global and public. Many are there who ask, What's the need for internet governance? Isn't the term by itself an oxymoron? And why for India? When one considers that the internet world was born in total freedom, lives in total freedom, and looks forward to a free future, it does look inappropriate to straitjacketing it with rules and regulations. And as rightly stated by the father of internet, Vincent Cerf, the remarkable social impact and economic structures of the internet is in many ways directly attributable to the architectural characteristics that were part of its design. The net was designed with no gatekeepers over new content and services. I repeat this quote of Vincent: the internet was designed with no gatekeepers of new content and services. Quote end. While one does need a basic framework of rules, even for a free environment, I respectfully submit that we must ensure that the internet remains open for development and innovation. In scope, the term internet governance is wide, but so are the internet governance tasks. The UN defined it as the development and application by governments, private sector, civil society, in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. Quote ends. Cybersecurity, digital trend, free speech, privacy, institutional influence, and geopolitics are all important areas of concern to the overall internet governance debate. And it is these rules, principles, procedures, etc., and reforms that relate to this and other internet governance issues that we are here today to discuss. In conclusion, I would like to quote a golden advice from Dr. Yovan Kurbalia, who is with us as a special guest of honor. He said, and quote, although internet governance deals with the core of the digital world, governance cannot be handled with a digital binary logic of true or false or good or bad. Internet governance demands many subtleties and shades of meaning and perception. It thus requires, very strangely I must say, an analog approach covering a continuum of options and compromises. Quote ends. This is a beautiful piece of advice. We must remember this in India, particularly when we go on. This sort of approach is all the more relevant for a continent like ours, which is the world's largest functioning democracy, with a tremendous diversity of cultures, demographics, and opinions. And in consonance with Dr. Kubalia's approach, the AIF and esteemed partners through these digital dialogues is to contribute to evolving a practical framework for analysis, discussions, and resolution of significant issues in the field. In particular, we, BIF, and our partners here, our esteemed partners here, we are all keen to adopt this as a key mission of ours and encourage industry as well as other stakeholders to actively participate in these dialogues and forums to build an open, inclusive, and interoperable internet for all. We do have a long and challenging haul ahead, but we cannot afford to slow down or stop. And again, to quote again Dr. Kurbalia, he has cautioned, and I quote now, internet governance is moving increasingly into the public eye. The more modern society depends upon the internet, the more relevant internet governance. And as you all know, in India, we having embraced the vision of Digital India, it has now become an imperative for us. It's no longer a theoretical option. It's an absolute imperative. Respected chief guest, our eminent panelists and special guests of honor, all you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I once again warmly welcome you all and thank you for your patient hearing. BIF and our partners wish you all a very vibrant and healthy discussion in this and the other dialogue to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, TV, for your insights and the introduction and your welcome.
Of his roadmap, which was issued on 11th of June, is on development, less social culture, technology, legal, human rights, cybersecurity, and a bit weak on the economic aspect. I'm mentioning this roadmap because it is going to be frequently mentioned in the forthcoming months and years whenever you have international discussion on the digital issues. Therefore, it will be some sort of framework document. Therefore, the SDGs and development is in the center, and also interdependence, which you can find on the question of data governance. You have a technological aspect of data, you have economic, security, law, and human rights. Therefore, this is another underlying element of the roadmap for digital cooperation. Specifically speaking, the most frequently used words in this roadmap are open, inclusion, trust, emerging inequalities, mapping. One interesting tendency is lower relevance of innovation as a concept, which has been for a long time one of the dominant concepts. Then Secretary General plans to appoint, what he intends to do, to appoint a tech envoy in 2021 to establish a multi-stakeholder group on digital inclusion, to work to promote holistic capacity building, to establish multi-stakeholder digital inclusion coalition, to establish advisory board on artificial intelligence, and in particular to strengthen IGF. IGF Internet Governance Plus Forum as the main anchoring place for digital discussion. I would say some sort of digital home for humanity. And this, I'm sure that Chengetai will reflect more on it. There were a few missing elements. There is no single mentioning of a blockchain in the roadmap, Internet of Things, strangely enough, World Summit on Information Society, UN CSTD mapping of Internet governance, and more interplay between Agenda 2030 and digital cooperation. Those are just a small points which should have been in the roadmap. Now, roadmap outlined as one of the main elements this new IGF Plus ecosystem, which it's a bit complicated drawing, but I'm sure the Chengetai will reflect more. But the idea is to have place on the global level, but also national, regional level, where we can answer these phone calls for the policy solutions, where we can also help, in particular, small and developing countries to find easy entry point into this more than 1,000 mechanisms, where there is a space for help desk and observation to help people to connect the dots, on, for example, contact tracing apps, technological standardization, human rights, e-commerce, and other aspects. This is currently missing, and we hope that IGF Plus ecosystem will create this space towards creating digital home for humanity, which is missing currently, and which is missing also in quite a few regional and national contexts. Therefore, in conclusion, we are trying to do a relatively simple task, but also very complex task, to find ways to answer calls for digital policy solutions on cybersecurity, human rights, e-commerce, and other issues. Mechanisms are not missing. Only on 5G there are more than 50 different mechanism processes and standardization. The main challenge, in particular for small countries, but I would say even for the major actors like India, is to reduce confusion and to find easy entry point into the digital policy discussion. And I would like to invite all of you, the country of origin of this world of Shunya and digital world, to make really proactive moves on the national, regional, and global level towards reducing current confusion, creating more inclusion, and shaping more sustainable and enabling digital future for India, region, and for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kurbalia. I think that was the most scholarly presentation. Thank you very much for the presentation. And what I'm struck by when you make those remarks is that we are certainly at a point of inflection, but also the world has become a lot more complex than it was. And this complexity is best addressed in a holistic manner and by cooperation. When you have a collective problem like cybersecurity or inclusion or e-commerce, I mean, these are all global issues. And for global issues, just like the pandemic, you would need a global solution. And I think that's very well taken. There are a few words that struck me also about your presentation is the inequality, the inclusion, the trust factor, which is extremely important, the cooperation, and the social cultural aspects. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. It's my absolute pleasure now to invite my old friend Ankhi Das for her remarks. Ankhi, as you know, is the Public Policy Director of Facebook for India, South Asia, and Central Asia. India, South and Central Asia, I beg your pardon, and has 22 years of experience in public policy and regulatory affairs in the tech sector. And she leads Facebook's efforts on internet governance, promoting access and open internet, privacy, data security, safety issues, and political risk management. Prior to joining Facebook, Ankhi was public policy director at Microsoft, handling public policy projects and regulatory issues. She will be speaking on enhancing Indian engagement in internet governance. Ankhi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rajat. It's great to be here with everybody and see some familiar friends on this particular panel. So my compliments to BIF and Amrita for pulling this together. I want to touch upon a few themes and sort of Diplo. I also want to commend the amazing work which Diplo Foundation has been doing over the years to really provide this knowledge repository for all of us who have an abiding interest in internet governance. It also is a great resource for budding researchers, the student community who are looking at materials in terms of making sense of the internet governance area, which has been in the works since the early 2000s. And in order to sort of collapse all that learning in a single way, really an incredible amount of public commons work which you are doing, Dr. Kurbalia, and my compliments to you for this consistency with which you have approached this area of academic learning in a way, but also making sure that it is very practical in terms of implementable ideas. A couple of words, buzzwords which I picked up listening through your presentation was digital cooperation, which obviously is embedded into the UN high-level panel's work, and interdependence. So I think these are important tooling. These are not just words, but tooling parameters which have to be embraced in order to moving towards the goal of inclusion. If inclusion is the goal, these are the tools. This also assumes then as a design factor, the importance of multi-stakeholderism. And that is something which I think was germane to the start of the IGF Internet Governance Forum following the Tunis agenda. India's involvement back in the day since that time has been there. I mean, has been pretty significant, I would say, because the first IGF chairman, the MAC chairman, was Nitin Desai, as everybody would recall, and that is when even India started engaging with WSIS 1 and WSIS 2 subsequently. We hosted the global IGF meeting in 2008 in Hyderabad, as people would recall on this call. Of course, since then, the growth of the internet in our country has exploded many times. COVID has brought home that how central and how mainstream this has become for every facet of human life, whether it is staying connected with friends and family, whether it is making sure that you have a path to accessing markets, so that despite the economic contraction which is happening, there is a way to address economic well-being and trade and engage in trade and commerce. At the same time, it has brought it has brought to the fore the importance of continuing to invest in developing public trust in this important medium, because in an age where, while we figure out what disease control is going to look like for this pandemic, there has to be a concerted effort in terms of improving public trust in the internet. And the roadmap does address this issue. I think the IGF meeting this time, the annual meeting this time, which again has gone virtual because of the pandemic, and it will be interesting to see what is the kind of engagement in this new form of delivery we are able to retain as a community, as a IGF community, but also make sure that there is good participation and engagement. It also sort of, this particular IGF also focuses on public trust as a key theme. From an India perspective, there has been a degree of involvement with the IGF, both in terms of the national meetings, and we have seen an improvement in the level of participation over the years. There has been deep engagement at the annual meeting. We have seen some degree of involvement in terms of the APRA IGF, which is the Asia Pacific Regional IGF meetings, the regional meetings. From a Facebook perspective, we have been very involved, both in terms of the global IGF meetings as a participant of the private sector community, and extremely invested in the regional and national IGFs. We have been, for Afghanistan, for example, Afghanistan has started this pretty remarkable national IGF meeting every year. There's a huge focus on human rights, gender rights, safety, bringing more women online. We've been engaged in all of those conversations. In India, there was some talk in terms of starting a national IGF, but it has not been, it has not materialized in terms of having a very cohesive model in terms of actually landing this in the country. And given the importance of inclusion, which we need to reorder in the IGF discussion, I think it will be incredibly useful at an institutional level for India to start thinking about hosting a national IGF. It would allow for a host of participation, not only from the country, but also I think from our neighboring countries in South Asia, and build that dialogue in a very active way. The example posed by CGI Brazil is a good model to look at in terms of looking at how do you build an institutional process in order to host the national IGF. And I know METI Secretary is participating in our meeting, which BIF is hosting today. And through this forum, I would like to request Secretary Sir to see if there could be some energy put in that in terms of creating that kind of a process which allows for this kind of event to be, this kind of a meeting to be held in India, which again is not only a tremendous input to our community here in India, but also to the neighboring countries, I would argue, and to the regional process of the Asia Pacific IGF. In terms of the roadmap, there are a couple of areas which I think, as my earlier speaker mentioned, which would be useful for us to double click on, because I think the UN high level report was written in a pre-COVID era, and nobody has seen this, right? Like this extent of this magnitude of this disease and how it has impacted all of us. And therefore, I think it will be useful, though there's a trade table. The trade table is discussing the trade agenda, the digital trade agenda, which Rajat also talked about. But I think from an internet governance perspective, it will be useful for the roadmap to include areas of future of commerce, particularly as far as digital trade is concerned, and also the element of related to the blockchain area. Also look into the area of digital payments, because that has also become now mainstream given the reality that we live in. In terms of health and contact tracing, this again is a post-COVID impact. I think there is a need for the IGF to look at standard setting of contact tracing apps and start shaping norms so that the contact tracing apps are recognizing the privacy protected principles, because a lot of these, they're also recognizing something which every public health professional will tell you about, which is a value of manual contact tracing, because that also exists side by side, because we have all these frontline public health workers who are providing this incredible frontline service. And what is the tools which the manual contact tracing methods end up using as we sort of look at a post-COVID world. So I think from a roadmap perspective, I would really request and urge the extension of the mandate to include themes of trade and commerce at one end and public health at the other end, including both the phenomena of contact tracing apps which we are seeing and the need to have some kind of standard setting norms which sort of sets the principles of these apps operating in a way that it respects human rights as well as privacy principles. And second is the recognition of this very important role which manual contact tracing provides, but which kind of has been underappreciated in the current environment or the current literature which we have seen. So I would end my submission with these thoughts, and really look forward from the private sector perspective to contributing to the national IGF thinking, if we as a country, as India, are able to address that, given the eminent role which has been played by the Indian community, both in terms of the formation of the IGF as well as their input in the high-level committee report where Ambassador Gill served in the Secretariat. So with that, I'll end my remarks, Rajat.
Thank you, Aki, for those rich insights. Pleasure listening to you. Also, I'm struck by what you said and what was a continuation of what Jovan has also said. This is hugely disruptive, and in a positive sense. I think it disrupts society, it disrupts economies, it disrupts, of course, technology is disruptive. But in a positive sense. Often we sort of think of this as being negative. I think this is in a positive sense, and therefore, if we have to find a solution, it has to be through greater cooperation. And I think your idea of setting up a national IGF, which will, at least for India, have much more voices, much more participation, so that what we do, not only the process, but the outcomes also becomes, multi-stakeholder driven, just like in a global sense. So thank you, Aki, for those remarks. And it's my absolute delight now to invite Mr. Chengetai Masango, who is the head of United Nations Internet Governance Forum Secretariat and central to what we are discussing today. And he also set up the World Summit on Information Society to facilitate public policy discourse on issues related to key elements of internet governance to foster sustainability, robustness, security, stability, and development of the internet. He holds a master's degree in international relations, global information policy. So, Mr. Chengetai Masango, it's a delight to have you. Thank you for agreeing to speak, and the floor is yours.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. I would also like to give my thanks and compliments to Mr. Rajat Makuraji and Mr. Ramachandran and the BIF Organizing Committee for organizing this great event. Let me just switch over now to see if I can just set up my pre-recorded presentation, just in case we had any issues. Okay, here we go.
Chengetai, the audio isn't working.
Oh, it's not working? Ah, okay.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
Chengetai, at least I can hear you.
You can hear me?
No, you have to speak, Chengetai. Your audio of your video isn't working.
Ah, okay.
I can read from Chengetai lips, but I am not sure that all participants are that capable. Because we have been knowing each other for a long time.
Just 1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay,
No,
great.
but your video has no.
It's a typical analog problem for digital world. It works and doesn't work.
You may want to speak, Chengitai.
The video doesn't have audio.
No, I'm sure that Chengetai is calling us to take active participation in internet governance. And yeah.
Chengitai, we can't hear you. You would have to enable your audio or your presentation isn't working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I have no idea why it didn't work. I had a lot of graphics and stuff, but it's okay. I can just say it. Okay. So, greetings, ladies and gentlemen from Geneva. It's an honor to connect with you today. I've been asked to give you an overview of the Internet Governance Forum, its origins, makeup, processes, and also a bit about the future outlook. The IGF is one of the major outcomes of the World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS. One of the summit's chief aims was to find ways to bridge the global digital divide at an international level, as well as at a national and regional one. This digital divide could lead to the shaping of new classes of those who have access to information and communication technologies, and those who have not. The WSIS Summit was held in two phases. We had the Geneva phase in 2003 and the Tunis phase in 2005. The issue of internet governance came in at the 2003 Geneva Summit, and then there was a failure to reach consensus on the question of internet governance and even the definition of what internet governance was. At that time, the internet was predominantly run by the technical and academic community. But as more and more of the social and economic activity spread to the internet, governments also wanted to say how it was run. As a result, as with most UN processes, when there's no agreement being reached within a meeting, the UN Secretary General was asked to set up the Working Group on Internet Governance, WIGIG. And Jovan was a member of that group. And the task of the group was to develop a working definition of internet governance, identify the public policy issues that are relevant to internet governance, develop a common understanding of the respective roles and responsibilities of governments, existing international organizations, and other forums, as well as the private sector and civil society from both developing and developed countries. The chair of the group was Mr. Nitin Desai, then the special advisor to the Secretary General for Internet Governance. It was to submit a report during the second phase of the WISA summit in Tunis. That was in 2005. As a result of the report, the IGF was established in 2006, and its mandate is set out in paragraph 72 of the Tunis Agenda of the Information Society. Its mandate was for 5 years, and this was renewed for a further 5 years in 2010, and then in 2015 it was renewed for 10 years. This current mandate expires in 2025. So, what is the IGF? The IGF is a global multi-stakeholder platform that facilitates the discussion of public policy issues pertaining to the Internet. The forum aims to maximize the opportunity for open and inclusive policy dialogue and the exchange of ideas. It's meant to create opportunities to share best practices and experiences, as well as to identify key themes that could be in future benefit of all stakeholders. The IGF is based on the soft governance approach. Though, as has been said previously, there has been a move to make more recommendations to set ESA, which is based in New York. Then there is the IGF Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, which Anki Das was a member of, a very valued member of. The Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group was established by the Secretary General to advise him on the program and schedule of the Internet Governance Forum's annual meetings, and its task now has increased also to the intersessional activities. The MAG is composed of a representation of stakeholder groups, and the stakeholder groups are governments, the private sector, civil society, and the technical community, with a view of achieving balanced regional and gender representation. IGOs and treaty-based organizations are also free to appoint representatives to the MAG. I may also add that the way the MAG and the whole IGF operates is that everybody is at an equal footing. It doesn't matter whether you're a large country or a small country, you're a civil society person or a person from the private sector. It just goes the order you put your hand up, the order in which you request the floor. That is the order that you're given. And this is very, very unique in the UN environment, because in the UN, of course, it is member states come first, then maybe the private sector, and then civil society is sometimes way back there in the back benches and the nosebleed seats, looking down, seeing everybody discussing. But the IGF, it's multi-stakeholder, it is inclusive, and everybody has a voice and has a right to speak. The MAG is renewed by a third each year, and members serve a maximum of 3 consecutive terms. For the 2021 MAG, we have launched the process, and the deadline for this is the 25th of August to nominate names. So I do encourage all of you, please go to the IGF website and see and fill out the form if you know somebody who would make a good MAG member, or if you yourself think you'll make a good member, please just fill out the nomination form and we'll take a look at it. The 2020 MAG, the current MAG, is chaired by Ms. Henriette Esterhuizen of South Africa. Now, the third component of the IGF, of course, is the stakeholder. And this is the most important part of the IGF. And the stakeholders are basically every user and every potential user of the Internet. And of course, this is divided into 5 self-defined groups. Now, a little bit about the IGF processes. There's the Igf Annual Meeting, which is a 5-day meeting where we have over 300 on-site participants with about the same online. And there has been 14 IGF meetings so far. The first one was in Athens, Greece, followed by Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And then the third one was in Hyderabad, India, which incidentally was one of the more memorable ones. And you can ask Jovan for that. I'm sure he totally agrees with me. This year, we will hold the IGF virtually because of the COVID-19. And next year, it will be in Katowice, Poland, followed by Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and then it will be in Japan in 2023. So if India wants to host the IGF again in 2024, please contact me. We've actually held it twice in Brazil, once in Rio de Janeiro and the other time in João Pessoa. The IGF meetings consists of workshops, open forums, dynamic coalition sessions, which are bottom-up initiatives organized by at least 3 stakeholder groups coming together and are dedicated to an internet governance issue or set of issues. An example of a dynamic coalition is the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, the Dynamic Coalition on Platform Responsibility, and the Dynamic Coalition on Small Island Developing States in the Internet Economy. So we cover a whole range of issues. Then we have the best practice forums, which are approved by the MAG and seek to collect a set of good practices on specific issues in order to help stakeholders in their implementation, as well as to learn from each other. For the IGF 2020 cycle, the best practice forums we have is one for cybersecurity. The second one is gender and access, which is very important. We should leave no one behind. And then the third one is data and new technologies in an internet context. So this looks at what best practices exist to ensure that users' data is collected, analyzed, and used to bring benefit and not harm to users. And this is particularly important now in the COVID-19 with this contact tracing apps that are flourishing all over the place, etc. And then the fourth one, of course, is local content. Then we have high-level sessions which engage government ministers, CEOs, and other high-ranking representatives from the UN and IGOs and NGOs. Then we have main sessions which focus on particular topics. I'm sure this year the main sessions will be focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic and how and ways to mitigate it, especially using information technology and ICTs. Starting last year, we started this parliamentary track, which is specifically tailored for legislators, because in order to make good policy instruments, of course, the legislators have to know what the issues are and also have an idea of all sides of a given issue. And we have the youth track and flash sessions. And finally, we have the IGF Village Booths, which are organized by stakeholders and where they can showcase their non-commercial IG-related efforts. I had a good graphic made by Diplo here of a snapshot of the national and regional, a snapshot of the IGF activities in Berlin, Germany, but unfortunately, of course, I can't show it now. But I will put a link to my presentation, and then you can always download it and view it at your leisure. One key component of the IGF is the national and regional initiatives, which follow the IGF model at the national and regional level. There are over 131 active national and regional initiatives all over the globe, but unfortunately, there isn't a national initiative in India. And I think it would be a very good idea, as the previous speakers have said, to start a national IGF initiative, since India has, hosted an IGF meeting, and it has also been a very strong force in the internet governance debate, starting off with Nitin Desai and a whole lot of other people, including Anki. So with that, I encourage you to visit the IGF website and see where you can engage. For the IGF for the future, I'd like to say that we are always future-oriented. We always say that we do always undergo this continuous improvement process. every single year at the end of IGF annual meetings, we have an open forum where people can come in and tell us what worked well, what didn't work well, and what can be improved. And also at the beginning of each year, we have write-in suggestions, for the year. So we're always looking to improve. And there have been also other efforts, especially those of note is the CSTD improvement recommendations, which we have been implementing. And as Jovan has said, there has been the HLBTC and the roadmap with the IGF Plus, which I will not go into. I'll leave that to Jovan to explain because he's got very nice graphics and knows how to explain things very simply, explain the most complicated things very, very, very simply that anybody can understand. So I'll leave it up to him. And so we are working with the Secretary General's office, with stakeholders, with the champions as well, to see how we can implement this IGF Plus model. One of the key things that are actually holding us back a little bit, and of course, which holds back a lot of people, is funding. We have to find the funding for that, and we do need the donors to step up and donate money to the IGF Trust Fund so that we can implement all the great ideas that are being given to us. And with that, I will stop here and thank you very much. And apologies again for my presentation not working properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chengetai Masango, for the very rich remarks and an in-depth description of what the IDF does, the structure and the processes. And what I think you endorsed what Anki had said before is for India to have a national internet governance forum so that all stakeholders can contribute. And this would have been a good message for the Secretary, Mr. Ajay Sahni, Secretary of Sahni, Ajay Sahni, who was supposed to speak next, but unfortunately, due to some unavoidable and pressing engagement in government, he's had to leave us. And so we will straight go to the question answer session that I will try and moderate. But I do want to say, something that Chengetai spoke about, and of course he spoke about many things, but one of the things that you emphasized was the democratic nature of the process and democratic nature of the access, including, I guess, gender is something that you emphasized on. So democratizing the internet both in terms of access as also in terms of views and opinions, and then dovetailing it with gender parity in all these features. In the two ways, I think, I'm putting on my economist hat and looking at, what are the two ways that one could measure this access or digital divide that we often talk about. One way to measure, of course, is to look at the internet penetration within a country, and within countries look at the digital divide and see how deep or how in-depth the digital divide within a country is, both in terms of access as well as in terms of gender. Another way to do it would be to say, okay, let's forget about national boundaries or nation states and look at how internet has done globally, and whether global internet access in a secular sense, both in terms of gender as well as in access, has that been increasing? And my submission is that we should look for convergence at both levels, both at the national level, there should be some convergence in access and gender, and also at the global level, there should be convergence in access and gender. And the reason I'm saying this is because you don't want countries like China and India, who are very, very populated, to drive the global access. So you could sort of mistakenly be led to thinking that there is global convergence because there is convergence within China or within India. That may not be an accurate way to look at whether there is convergence globally or not. I thought I'd just mention this because this came in as Chengetai was speaking, and I was thinking of how one could define access and parity and democratization of the internet. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of throw this open to the audience, and of course there are questions that have been posted, and I'll refer the questions to either a particular speaker or anybody who's interested. The first question that I have is from Rahul Sharma, who's the founder of The Perspective, And he says, why are tech giants running data ecosystem and stakeholder relationships? And there are so many cases across continents on data abuse, antitrust, anti-competition. Can there be a roadmap for improving such practices, both nationally and globally? And so essentially, it's sort of the fear of data becoming sort of, because of the network effects, companies becoming very large, and as they become large, will there be a tendency to exploit their presence in markets? Anki, do you want to take that? And anybody else who wishes to respond to that, Yovan, Sangatai, any of the other speakers who want to respond to that, they're welcome to. But let me sort of give this to Anki first, what her response is, and then I'll open it up to others as well.
So on this particular question of what is I think the question is about market behavior and use of data. There are multiple ways in which this is being governed. There is obviously the national regulation and the national regulatory framework, which is there, which is a combination, Rajat, as you know, of both policy and enforcement. So that is one particular parameter. There is also international standards which are there both in the privacy domain and in the global competition domain as well. And these are evolving models. Some of this evolution is basically seen by the way in which, different type of case law is emerging. And this has happened historically in the history of internet. This is not a new fact. It's been, there's a decadal reference point for this as this has evolved, as economic deepening has happened. And that has kind of provided kind of a emerging baseline in terms of how regulation should be shaped. So at an internet governance forum level, the privacy discussion has been a very robust discussion for a very long time in terms of involving issues of consumer protection at one level, but also sort of the privacy rights, governance models around data sharing principles, what is the kind of disclosures which companies will have to provide. All of these have played out in the internet governance domain. But like I said, in terms of the regulation question, which is what I think the question is, this is something which is happening both in the national domain as well as a case law is emerging on these topics.
Thank you, Anki. Would Chengitai or Jovan want to supplement?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Yes. Well, this is one of the crucial issues. Data. You have this all metaphors is oil or blood of modern society, and obviously there is a concern about monopolies of the major actors. Secretary General in the roadmap, for the first time in official UN document, mentioned that the current business model of the big tech companies is a structural problem which leads inevitably into the, let's say, difficulties with data protection. Therefore, it was interesting. It wasn't just privacy, but he highlighted that there is a structural problem with the current business model, as we are aware that major tech companies are basically monetizing data, among other things. This is the first point. The second point is that countries are aware of this problem. I'm sure that there is very rich discussion in India, but worldwide about data as a national asset, which is both good for awareness, but also potentially risky that countries may keep the data within their national boundaries. And obviously, the third point is that there is data as a basic resource for AI, for artificial intelligence. Therefore, companies, including Facebook and other companies, are moving from simple monetization of data towards use of the data for the development of more sophisticated AI products. And therefore, that it will be much cleaner business model where we buy Tesla car or something and it is just better product and our data is not monetized. But we have to be fair in this discussion. We use very sophisticated platforms, and we got used to have it to use it for free, or not against monetization. But these companies have expenses; they have to pay for servers, for programmers, for other things. Therefore, more transparency and fairness in this discussion would help everybody, and I think we can find a solution which will help them to continue innovating while bring a fairness in the way how our data is used. Over.
Thank you, Jovan. I think that's the key, is how do you find that balance? And that's going to be really the key to addressing this question. Mr. Masango, would you like to add to that question? Can't hear you. Can't hear you, sorry. No, not audible. You're not audible.
Chengeta, your audio is not enabled. You have to enable it again.
Chengeta, go to Open Broadcaster and fix it.
This is technology. Well, so while that is being fixed, I'll come back to Chengeta once his audio is fixed. There's another question relating to participation in the MAG. And the question is, have the youth less than 30 years of age previously been a part of the MAG? How can they be made more interested? How can youth enhance their participation in the domain and contribute more to the MAG process? And related to that question, the same person, Samrit Kudesia, is that something that Ankhi said, is that how can we enable the national IGF in India? So there's two parts to that question. One is, have the youth been able to participate in the MAG process? If not, why not? And if so, how? And how can we enable a national IGF in India? Ankhi, again, let me come to you first, and then I'll go to Chengetai and Jovan.
So National IGF provides a remarkable process and structure, because when you have to pull such a equitable discursive space, which is what the IGF is, because we are, in the beginning we all discussed, right, digital cooperation, interdependence, inclusion, and for that you have to create a discursive space. The government has a very important role to play. The multi-stakeholder community, which is representative of the technical community, civil society, private sector, academic community, also has an important role to play. So I think, which is why I keep on going back to the CGI Brazil model, which I think is a very good model. It has sustained over a period of time. It also played a very important role during Net Mundial, which was a global meeting. So my input here would be that we need to engage with the government of India, which is essentially our line ministry, the ICT ministry, which is METI, to really play a front-leading role in terms of convening the discussion and then taking some of the global best practices in terms of the national IGF models, whether it's the Brazil model or the US model, convene the group and really encourage participation. One good thing about the IGF is also that it then creates a community. The youth IGFs, which precedes the global IGF meeting, is one of the most energetic and creative forums which we have seen over the years. And a lot of us look forward to participating in that, because it just ends up sparking so much of new ideas and thoughts. I would really encourage, METI to take a important view on this, as well as make sure that there is an interministerial, engagement also. Because if you look at IGFs, at times the Foreign Office, which is MEA, also participates in a lot of these meetings, global meetings. So we need to create this nucleus by way of a national IGF. That architecture today is missing.
Thanks, Anki. Chengitai, Yovan, can you address the question on youth participation and the MAG process, please? Can you?
Well, Chengeta is fixing his technical problem. As far as I know, there is no limitation. There are encouragements to have young people participating. And what Anki said, this is also capacity building process and awareness building process. We don't have experts like ready-made experts in internet governance like we have in the field of commerce, trade, intellectual property. This is field in making. Therefore, people are also learning about the IGF, and this is sort of while we are working IGF, we are building capacities. And one point on the national IGF that I would like to advise by doing comparative survey of different national IGFs, it has to be framed as win-win solution. Sometimes governments ask, why do we need IGF? It won't be a problem in India. Why do we need IGF when we can make decisions or in parliaments? IGF could be used as sounding board by government, by parliament, and all of these actors should bring their respective roles. Governments obviously prepare the law, execute the law. Businesses provide valuable services and make a profit ultimately. Civil society, as I always say, should make a noise and keep everybody accountable. And India can play an important role in this model, but try to avoid this traps that sometimes exists. Instead of win-win, people move into win-lose framing. And that's win-win option could be very valuable, like for vibrant democracy as India is. Over.
Rajat, Amrita here. May I add a few points out here?
Absolutely.
Just wondering if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great! Finally. Okay,
Yeah.
please, Amrita, please carry on. I'm sorry for this.
No, Chengitai, you can make your point and.
Okay. So for the first question, I think, as Jovan was saying, I mean, it is a very complex situation, and there are points on all sides, and it is very good that discussions are going on, and I think it is very necessary. I mean, I'm not just saying this because I'm with the IGF, but it is very necessary that all stakeholders, the governments, the companies that run the platforms, and even the consumers themselves sit together, talk about their issue, because as has been said, I mean, there is a cost, and at the moment it is a free cost to the consumers. They are selling it. I mean, they are buying these services by giving away their data. But if that's not a method, then of course another solution has to be found. But this can only be found through discussion, and not only in places like the IGF, but the WTO, etc. I didn't catch the second question much about the IGFs and the youths. Yes, we have had people who are below 30 in the MAG, and this year we are trying to drive that we have at least 2 youth representatives. But this year, youth is 16 to 25. So if you're below 25, please apply for the MAG, and we will try and get you in. Of course, this depends on the applications. But please, yes, do. And we do try and engage the youth. Last year in the IGF, I think the youth made a lot of statements saying that they needed to be engaged. But the IGF is one of those places where you have to come in and seek to engage as well. I mean, there's a very low barrier of entry, but there is not that much pulling of people in. I mean, the places there, the entry for you as easy as possible, but you yourself have to go in there, say, oh, I'm interested in this. Can I please join? And then we will, of course, include you in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sengitai. Most encouraging, I think, for whoever asked that question. Amrita, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you. The point which I wanted to make is, yes, I agree with Aki that we definitely need an IGF in India. Since we haven't been able to have an IGF from the India School of Internet Governance, which is a group of 4 Internet Society chapters, we supported the Youth IGF in India, which had 2 such series in the last 2 years, and this would be the 3rd. So the idea which we came up with, and obviously METI did support the initiative, is even if we are not being able to start the IGF in the full form, at least we have the youth dialogue going. But we would be happy to work with other stakeholders to come up with an IGF in the country.
Thank you, Amrita. So there are a couple of other questions. So I think, and we are running out of time, so I will ask those questions, and if you could be brief in your response. One is a question, I think, from Nikhil Pava, and this has already sort of been addressed by Jovan in his earlier remarks, but let me put that question to the others as well. What are your views on data as a fundamental right for citizens? And so Jovan talked about, data as an asset, data as a property right. So what about data as a fundamental right? What are the panel's views on these conflicting views on data, or apparently conflicting views on data? Anybody? Aki, Chengetai?
So I think there are 2 principles which are very important in terms of, in terms of addressing this, and very good question from Nikhil as usual. It is a right, whether you classify that as a fundamental right or as a crucial right, that is a matter of detail. But I think everybody recognizes the seriousness of this right. There are 2 principles, governing principles, I think, which are embedded into this as a definitional criteria, which is whether individuals have choice and whether they have control. So to the extent that these principles are, are recognized and respected, whether it is in product development or in data governance or how you go and build the future of the data economy and the future of digital society, I think that is important. It also is an area of continuing discussion in terms of understanding the practice as to how control and choice is actually implemented. One argument is that is basically fructifies in a form of consent principles. User consent is one such implementation. But I think it's probably worthwhile from an IGF perspective to start looking at what is the menu in terms of how this would actually be fructified. At a very baseline level, this operates as a consent principle. And as you know, India is in the middle of enacting its own data privacy and data protection legislation. There are other jurisdictions where the jurisprudence is evolving and it is a much more mature stage. So obviously we need to look at those models as well. But I would think that there is a recognition of data being an important right, and then there are principles which have to be developed in order to do product development in this area to take forward the digital economy.
Thank you, Aki. If Sengitai or Jovan have any further views on this question, I would offer them the opportunity.
Okay, I was just going to point out when we're talking about data, of course, there's control of your data. You have the right. You have the right to control the use of your data, and it depends also what aspects are we looking at? I mean, there is control of your data so that people may not make profit from it. And then there's also the right for people to access data. So these things are not mutually inclusive, but when we also talk about people controlling their data, does everybody, there are some things that people have the right to know, and there's some things that people don't have the right to know. I'm looking at it from an individual perspective. Let's say people have committed crimes and stuff like that. In the EU, we have the right to be forgotten. So, I mean, that's another thing about control of your data. When do you put in this right, and how far should it stretch out? So it's not a black and white issue. There's many complex and nuances in this debate of data and control of everybody's data, and also access to public data.
Thank you, Chengetai. Jovan, did you want to add something to what you had already said, or?
Yeah, maybe just one point, that discussion is extremely nuanced, and while it makes a lot of sense that my data is owned by myself, we are seeing, for example, strong arguments in analysis that applying proprietary logic to data can accelerate commodification of data. And there are a few researchers, in particular Parminder Singh from the Bangalore, who are focusing a lot on the data issues. And we have also to keep in mind that data is really an umbrella concept. But you have huge diversity. You have personal data, you have scientific data, you have communal data, or data collected on the traffic in Delhi or Bangalore or in Geneva. Is data owned by as a global common? Therefore, this discussion is present in the Secretary General's report. The question how to consider data as a global common or global public good. Therefore, there will be very interesting intellectual, conceptual, policy and practical discussion ahead of us. But we may have some sort of counterintuitive insights like this on the simple personal ownership of data. Over.
Thank you. So Nikhil has said that he's rewording his question, and it wasn't what he had asked. Let me read out the question for all of you. What are the panel's views on sovereignty of a nation extending to citizen data, as India has suggested in its comments at the OEWT?
Well, let me bring the reality is that many countries are moving on around sovereignty, not necessarily around data, but for example, taxation around data and immediate ways of increasing budget. Let's put it in a very simple way. But countries like India and like Switzerland will have to make difficult, not difficult decisions, but trade-offs, because we benefit from the cross-border exchange of data. Bangalore is a sort of back office, not only money, front office of the digital world. Switzerland depends a lot on the services on data. Our community diaspora is all over the world, moving data around. Therefore, it's easy to say we want to control data nationally, but then there are trade-offs. And even China, which has sort of a data sovereignty through Chinese law, is seeing that 13 million Chinese live abroad. Therefore, you have to have the integrated data exchanges, or their economy through Belts and Road Initiative is becoming globalized. Therefore, notion of data sovereignty will face data reality, and these will be delicate trade-offs. Ideally, we should have a global solution which should be transparent, fair, and inclusive. That countries like India, Switzerland, all other countries feel comfortable that this global solution can deliver on their core national interests, which are increasingly built around data.
Okay, thank you, Jovan. And one last question. Of course, Jovan, you also have a question, and I'll take that at the end. But there's one last question that I'm going to take in the interest of time. This is by Ankit Anand, Senior Manager, Reliance Jio Infocom. He says, or he asks, as nations are evolving their own frameworks around national security perspectives, what are the IGF, MAG, IETF doing to help national government solve this problem? Maybe Chengetai is well placed to address this. Chengetai? Yeah. Can you? Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. At the IGF, we have several discussions on security. Security is a main theme for the IGF 2020 meeting. So we have several workshops, best practice forums, and open forums on this. We have a best practice forum on security, which is collecting a lot of best practices or good practices on security practices. And this is all going to be compiled and distributed widely. So that's one way we can do it. We also do connect people who have got particular issues. We did this with when certs were being set up, etc. So, and we act as a connector to people who have problems and finding people who can give them solutions. So this is all what we do. And if anybody has got a specific problem that is not addressed in the IGF, they can just come to the IGF and state that problem. And I'm sure people will come around it and try and solve it in some way or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Chengetai. And the final question is asked by a panelist himself. Jovan asks, and of course I'll let anybody on the panel, including TV or Rajat, Amrita, Ankhi, Chengetai, whoever wants to take this question, is what do you consider to be the most important policy aspect of contact tracing apps? What is the most important aspect of contact tracing apps? Jovan asks this. Ankhi, would you like to take this on, or anybody on the panel?
I'll just say one word: privacy.
Yes.
Privacy. We must be sure that the app and its stated purpose is used for that, not by governments, companies, etc., to find out who you're talking to or where you're going, or companies to find out whether or not you're at the office all the time, etc. So, yes, privacy.
Good.
I think privacy, and I think what Chengetai is talking about is surveillance, whether public or private surveillance. I think those two are the most important risks. So purpose limitation is very important, and then making sure that you are having transparent disclosures to demonstrate purpose limitation will be very important. I also think what I said earlier in my opening remarks is that while there are two types of contact tracing, right? There's automated contact tracing, which is where you're seeing a lot of energetic discussion on. But I think as an online community or as a digital community, which I think we are underappreciating, that there are a whole host of digital tools which are being used or ought to be used in terms of enabling manual contact tracing, which is what our frontline health workers rely more actively on. And I think there needs to be a whole lot of attention paid there in terms of seeing what could be both in terms of a hardware solution as well as in terms of the software solution. What are the possibilities in terms of enabling manual contact tracing in a more significant manner than it has been done currently?
Thank you, Ankhi. I think we have to draw this session to a close, and I'm not going to risk trying to summarize this very rich discussion that has happened. And indeed, it's a pleasure to have been a part of this and to have sort of moderated this excellent and stimulating, thought-provoking discussion. And I'm really happy that ICRIER has been able to participate along with the other stakeholders and of course BIF in this discussion. So thank you all very much. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to call upon Mr. Sashidharan to give the vote of thanks. You're not audible, Mr. Sashidharan. Please unmute yourself. No, you're still not audible. Or am I the only one who can't hear you? Can the others?
No, we can't hear him either.
Yes. We can't hear you, Mr. Sachdev.
Rajat, there was a question till Shashi comes. It was for you. A participant had asked for your views on data and trust online. As until the time Shashi comes, perhaps you would like to.
I'm the moderator. What was the question?
The question was for you to share your views on data and trust online.
Okay. So, this is an evolving issue, and at ICRIER we're trying to we're trying to work on this. And I agree with what sort of the previous speakers have said, is that data, you have to protect the data. There'll have to be adequate protection, but it's a nuanced issue. Data can create value, data can have damaging effects, and you have to nuance the data. What is the kind of data? You can't sort of homogenize data into one whole and say this is all in a homogeneous entity. Data will have to be nuanced. There are aspects of data that could have public good characteristics and therefore can be used for public benefit. And I think Jovan gave the example of traffic. And if you are interested in managing traffic well, that data will have to be then sort of calibrated, used, and to be able to come up with solutions which will be contextual to a particular area where the data emanates from in a particular city and so on. And there are lots of people who are actually beginning to work on this. And there are lots of PhD dissertations that are being written around how data can be used for managing public good, for managing public welfare. So I think this debate has to be more nuanced, and it is becoming more nuanced. Data is definitely heterogeneous enough to put it into a wide ranging of uses, including for public good, including for private benefit, and including for individual benefits. So I think this is exactly what John had said, and I completely agree. And we'll have to build up evidence to be able to support that. And I think, as I'm saying, there's lots of. I've been on some committees and review committees where there are PhD dissertations, especially on traffic, that are coming out that are using data as a public good, and then very interesting results of that analysis. Meanwhile, has Mr. Shashidharan been able to fix the mic, or would anybody else from?
I ask Rajat Mukherjee to then say the word of thanks.
Exactly.
I'll step in here in place of Shashi, and since he's unable to log in. Shashi, have you been able to correct that problem? I'm still not being able to hear you, Shashi, though I can see you.
Rajat, maybe you should continue. I think he's having a problem.
Yeah, okay. So let me just take this opportunity to reiterate what Dr. Kathuria was also saying earlier, that this has been an extremely vibrant session. I would like to thank each and every one of the speakers for having taken out the time so early in the morning in Geneva to join us and to create such a stimulating first session to the Internet governance grouping. This is the first session of a series of 3 sessions which we are planning, and the next 2 are on the 3rd and 6th of July. So I would welcome all the current attendees to please block your diaries and keep this in mind. We will be informing you about the exact timing in a short time. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our event partner, TSDSI, and CCAOI as well. Amrita, without you, this would never have been set up. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Rajat Kathuria for masterfully handling the entire session, a complex subject, undoubtedly, but handled with complete mastery by you, Rajat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot of other people need to be thanked for this, not least the BIF team, which has labored and toiled to put this entire thing together. So without necessarily going into, everybody knows who it is, done what. Thank you, Team BIF, for putting this together. Finally, I look forward to staying in touch with each and every one of you on this very complex subject of internet governance. And should there be the need, I will take the liberty of reaching out to you and asking for your opinions or additional thoughts on the subject. Thank you for joining us once again from Geneva. And TV Ramachandran, thank you for starting the session off. All the very best to everybody. Thank you.
I hope you can audible. I'm audible now.
You are now
audible. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to take Anki's suggestion of IGF hosting in 2024. The only issue is we will have a general election in 2024, but we will try our best to take this up with the ministry along with BIF and other associates, those who are partner in this event. And we will come back to you, Changatai, on this. Soon we will come back to you to take up this, and we'll be too glad to host this event in our country. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry there was some problem with the audio. Once again, thank you very much, TV sir, Rajat sir, each one of you who joined this event. This is the third digital dialogue, and the next is on 3rd July. And a big thank you to all the attendees and to our chief who could not be there for a long period. He has to go to another pressing appointment. Once again, thank you very much. Have a nice day.